Chapter 3 is infancy. So this is going to be physical growth in infancy and cognitive development, things like language, intelligence. Chapter 4 is going to be the social emotional chapter for infancy. All right. So I think that's just what I said. The book starts off talking a little bit about height and weight for infancy. So the average American newborn is about 20 inches long and weighs about 7.5 pounds. They will grow about 3/4 of an inch per month during the first year. So a substantial amount. By 2 years old, infants weigh approximately 26 to 32 pounds, and the average is 32 to 35 inches tall. So just kind of as a side note, 32, you're like, well, that's not bad. It gets pretty tough when you're taking them in and out of the car seat a whole bunch. 32 starts to get a little heavy, especially trying to maneuver them in there. And so anyways, the next part the book talks about is the brain. A lot of developments going on in the brain after they're born, in infancy, and actually, all the way up till throughout the entire lifespan, actually. They'd say, though, that your brain is fully developed about 25, but that depends on the person. Some people it could be 30, some people's 23, anyways. At birth, the brain weighs about 25% of what it will for its adult weight. Also, they talk, it's kind of weird they throw this in there, they talk about shaken baby syndrome this early on. But, they're talking about the brain, so the idea that they bring it up here, I guess, kind of makes sense. Basically, you don't want to shake your baby. The brain's not fully developed, and so if you're shaking the baby, it's going to smash around the skull, and it's going to cause all kinds of problems. So obviously, it's very obvious that you shouldn't be shaking your baby. It can cause brain swelling, it can cause hemorrhaging, all kinds of negative outcomes for that. So don't do it. With the brain, there are 2 hemispheres. So you got the cerebral cortex, and it is divided into 2 hemispheres, and each of those is divided up, so you have 4 lobes. There's a term that goes along with this called lateralization. With lateralization is a specialization of function in one hemisphere over the other hemisphere in the brain. For example, process language more in the left hemisphere, and you have more spatial thinking in the right hemisphere, and this is due to lateralization. That being said, you need to have both sides are needed for the tasks. You need to have communication between the 2 hemispheres, but for some things, one side will dominate. The brain begins to do this at birth. Example, with language, newborns showed more brain activity in the left hemisphere than the right when they were listening to someone speak to them. Okay. On the next slide, something else that's happening in the brain at this time is a significant increase in neurons. Neurons are what they process information. It's the communication system within the brain. A lot of increase in neurons in the first year. Twice as many connections are made than will be used. You have trillions of connections in your brain, and twice will be made, but then some of them will start to kind of fade away. Used neural connections, become stronger and survive. The unused ones are replaced or they disappear. And there's a term for this. It's called pruning, kind of like how you would prune a tree. You prune these neural connections. Some of them just kind of disappear. So basically the idea of use it or lose it. So if you repeat some task over and over and over, it will create that neural connection. You'll be able to continue, and you repeat that connection. It becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. If you don't do something, you're not going to build that connection, and then that potential neural connection just fades away. Blooming and pruning, so you have an explosion of neurons and the pruning of it. Another way of saying it's blooming and pruning. And this varies by brain region. They show that prefrontal cortex, higher level thinking, actually goes between 3 and 11. It peaks at 3. And then you start to prune. It starts to go down. You can kind of see it a little bit better on this figure 3.6, synaptic density in the brain from infancy to adulthood. And so you can see the prefrontal cortex, the red one, it peaks right here, which is about 3 years old, and then starts to go down. So if they go up, they peak, you get so many neural connections, and then it starts to prune, go down. So something to think about with this is you might start thinking about, with your kids, if you have them, start thinking about self-regulation at a very early age, like 3 years old, 2, 3, to create that neural pathway to strengthen it. Because self-regulation, which is in the prefrontal cortex, is huge skill advantage to have as an adult or even a kid too. But yeah, if you can start building that neural connection as early as possible, self-regulation, it's going to help your kid for sure. Okay. So a little bit more on the brain, early experiences in the brain. So genes are the basic wiring, and then the environment guides the development of the brain. We've already kind of talked about this now in a couple different chapters. Infants whose caregivers expose them to a variety of stimuli are more likely to develop to their full potential. So, talking, touching, playing different kinds of toys, taking them to different environments, maybe different musical instruments, trying different sports, novel stimulus, meaning new things in their environment and somehow, is important for development. This is when they are making those connections. So you want to try to get them started well in several different areas if you can. They have shown that children in deprived environments may have depressed brain activity. So the kids that don't have the different toys or experiences, they're not having all the novel stimulus that a kid, from maybe a higher SES background is getting, they are having less brain activity, and consequently they may not reach their potential. They're going to have less of those neural connections that we were talking about on the last slide. All right. So for the brain, that is the section on the brain in infancy. On the next slides, we will discuss the neuroconstructivist view, and we'll talk a little bit about sleep as well.